Hello and welcome to the Two Gals and a Mic podcast. I'm your host, Sue Kerber, and on today's show, I'm speaking with Katie Dahlheim, who's not only a practicing attorney and mom, but has implemented an innovative way to battle food insecurity throughout South Carolina's Low Country. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sue.
I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm really excited to talk to you because I know that you are a woman of many talents. And likely with two kids, I'm sure that you're very busy. How do you balance all of this? How do you balance practicing law, helping your kids, and feeding a community?
I would love to say I have the secret to doing all those things myself at once, but I don't think anybody does. And I think if anybody's telling you that they have it all figured out, they're maybe just kidding themselves. I have a lot of help. I have a great, very supportive husband. He works from home. He does a lot of the kids running around so that I can be at work during the day. And at this point, the Blessing Box project is pretty self-sufficient. In the early days, I was way more hands-on than I am now. Now it's established and it's in the communities where the boxes are and people know about it. And I don't really on the daily have to do a whole lot of work to sustain the project itself. So I can focus more on my work and my kids and that kind of thing. And then the blessing boxes kind of become something that happens in evenings, on the weekends, but not necessarily all the time.
Let's talk about this project. In 2017, almost 7 years ago, you
Yeah.
established the Blessing Box Project. Tell us a little bit about these boxes, like what they are, and then also what prompted you to do this.
In early 2017, I read about Jessica McLeod, who is a woman in Arkansas who created the Little Free Pantry. And I thought that's such a great idea. I love that she has taken the Little Free Library and made it for food. It's brilliant. It's going to serve so many people where she lives. And I really wanted to do something like that at my house, just like she did. But when I started thinking about it, I live on a cul-de-sac, so nobody comes to my house. Like nobody passes by the Dahlheim's house. And so it didn't make any sense for me to do it in the way that she had established it. And so I thought on that for a while. And also at that time, early 2017, here in Charleston, we had had the shooting at Mother Emanuel. We had had a racially police involved shooting the next year as well. Everybody seemed to be at odds here. And I really had been thinking about something that would bring everyone together. What can everyone agree on? Is there anything that everyone can agree on? And the more I thought about that and I thought about what Jessica had done, I decided that everyone has to eat. That's universal. And no matter your station in life, we can all afford to be just a little bit kinder to one another. If that means donating food, if that means not judging the person that you see taking food, that's going to mean something different to everyone. And so in the end, I couldn't have one. And so the way that my brain worked was, well, if I can't have one, then maybe I can have 10. And maybe I can convince other people to put them at their houses or their businesses or places of worship, things like that. And so I just decided to try that. I went to Habitat for Humanity to the Restore and I bought some kitchen cabinets and I brought them home and I cut the fronts of them off so you could see inside. Like I put plexiglass on the front. They were just beat up $5 Restore kitchen cabinets. And then I went, as all sane people do, to the internet to just try to find people, strangers who would buy into this idea that I had. And that part was actually really easy. I just started posting the idea that I had in various like Charleston neighborhood groups. And within a couple weeks, probably 3 people had responded and said, you can put one at my house. And so I took them over. They were not waterproof, like they were not meant to be outside. They just were very primitive versions of what the boxes are now. And so the idea is just leave what you can and take what you need. You can donate one week and be receiving food from someone anonymously the next week. There's no real rules. There's no requirement that you show that you have some sort of need. There's no paperwork. You don't have to come and say, I have 5 kids or anything like that. If you need it, you take it. And if you have it to donate, you leave it. And that's where the network of the boxes started.
So we're now, like I mentioned before, almost 7 years
Mhm.
into this project, and your initial 10 blessing boxes has grown to more than 250 locations throughout the Low Country. And we're defining the Low Country as the Charleston area. Are we going up to Myrtle Beach and down
So yeah, I
to?
would say like Hilton Head to Myrtle Beach sort of area, and inland to Somerville, St. George, so the low country of South Carolina. I keep a Google map of all the locations I know of in South Carolina, and I think there's more than 400, but ballpark 400 in the whole state.
Oh my goodness, from your 10 that you
Mhm.
started with. My question is, how in the world did you grow? Was this a targeted outreach campaign or did it grow organically? How did people know about this?
So I started some social media accounts, a Facebook and an Instagram. And after I had the first 4 or 5 of them established, I started doing a lot of interviews, like, in the news and in the paper and, the local morning show, that kind of thing. And then people started contacting me and saying, well, can we build one? Can my church build one? Can our Boy Scouts build one? And I just said yes to everybody because I didn't feel like it was my place to gatekeep this idea. I wanted it to be simple. I wanted it to be replicated by anyone who felt interested in doing it. So even when people wanted to put them literally across the street from each other, which has happened more than one place, I didn't say no to anyone. It really grew rapidly from there. We did get a donation of about $500 that first summer. I have a couple friends who work in construction, and so we had a construction day and we had volunteers come, and we built, I think, 6 of them in one day. And those were really good boxes, like waterproof, weatherproof, sturdy, really well made, surviving hurricanes kind of boxes. And those were the only ones that I've ever made. So I made the initial ones and then I made the construction day ones. All the rest have been other people.
And in between all of this growth, you also authored a book that you call Building a Kindness Army. So what was your inspiration for the book? Was it here's how you can replicate this in your community, or is it more than that?
During COVID, I had an interview with some researchers at a university who are studying food insecurity. And I did 2 very long sessions with them. The story of this project and growing this project is the same. I tell it the same each time. And so after those interviews, I reached out to them and I asked if they could just send me a transcript of what we had talked about because they had some really great questions and things that I wanted to reflect on more. And so they sent me the transcripts, and then once I had that in my hands, I thought, well, this is the beginning of a book. This is the beginning of a how-to, because once the project started growing, I started hearing from people all over the country. And I do have a job and I do have kids, and I would love to take 40 minutes on a Tuesday morning and talk to anybody who wants to build something like what I've built here in their community, wherever they live, but I just don't have the ability and the time to do that. So that was my motivation with the book, was if I can put this into the world in a form where people can access it at their leisure, then anyone can build where they live what I've done here.
Do you know if any projects in other states have cropped up as a result of the book?
My sister started a blessing box project in Columbus, Ohio, where she lives. And so I know there are at least 100 there that she has organized in Central Ohio. I've been in touch with lots of people over the years. I couldn't possibly list, all of them now. And the book has only been out a year and a half, maybe. So I think that between people following the Facebook page and the Instagram and different social media over the years in varying degrees of building what I've built here. And I talk in the book about, the wording that we use on the social media and the messaging and the disclaimer plate that we put on the boxes talking about, liability purposes. I want people to use that if they like it. I don't want to be possessive over any of that. That is not the goal. And it certainly was never my motivation for this to be like my project. If I could have been completely anonymous the whole time, I would have done that. But you can't spread information. Somebody has to go on the news and talk about it. So here I am.
And you said, to the best of your knowledge, you're at about 400 boxes just in South Carolina alone.
Mhm.
You've got the book, you have other states, you have people that are replicating this. Why food insecurity? Do you have a background in food insecurity? Why is this an important issue for you?
Everyone needs to eat. We have to all agree on that. My family is Italian. We show love through food, just as our love language. I'm a lawyer. I was a public defender for 6 years when I was first starting practice. And that position really gave me an insight into poverty, how hard it is to be in that situation, to get out of that situation, to function daily, the challenges every single day, every single hurdle. And just the idea that if we can help one family relieve some burden, then that's worth it to do that. This is not meant to feed every family all the time. This is more of a get from, today to payday, or get through your dog's vet bill is unexpected this month and so you're out of money, or your car broke down, or whatever it is. This project is more of a bridge than an actual day-to-day way to sustain your family's food needs.
So from a logistical standpoint, is it similar to the little community library boxes where maybe you have a book that you've read and you put it in that box and then you take another book and go enjoy that? I mean, how do you keep these supplied?
In the beginning of the project, I would get messages all the time from people that would say, my neighborhood box is empty and it hasn't been filled in a long time, or there's only beans in there. For some reason, people like to donate beans, then no one takes them and they pile up in there. I got a lot of messages in the beginning that said things like that. And then over time, I tried to do a really targeted job of telling people, like, this is your neighborhood, this is your community, you adopt this box as yours. And so if there are bugs in it, don't send a message to me on the Facebook page and say there are bugs in the blessing box. Either clean it up or ask if somebody else can. I wanted people who live in those areas to think of it as their own. I really felt like I turned a corner when I started seeing other people posting things like in the mom Facebook group that's like, hey, did anybody check on the blessing box today? That was when I was like, okay, it's working. And it was years into the project before that happened.
That must have been exhausting, trying to keep up with all of that, and then going back to what we started the conversation, mom of 2, and you said that you work a full time as an attorney.
I think I just got into a routine where I felt like I needed to share, like if I was scrolling the internet and I saw an article that related to it, I would share that. I tried to just be responsive to all the messages I was receiving and encourage people to share, the posts. And then I really tried to build that sense of community. Then everybody else was doing the work too.
There have had to have been highs and lows, challenges and successes. What has been the best part of this journey for you?
I have met so many awesome people, people that I would have never had any reason to encounter them. And they have become just such a blessing to me that really remind me like what's important and why I started this, and why I even thought this up in the first place. I do appreciate that people use the boxes and are glad that they're there. But I think that for me, I have been more blessed by this than anybody has been by it, if that makes sense. We have such a presence on the internet, but I don't know these people in real life. And what if we all could, I don't know, get together and hang out? Like, what would that look like? Because the people I was seeing comments from, I'm like, you think just like me. You don't look like me. You don't, come from where I come from. We don't believe the same, but your heart is the same as mine. And you want to give back and you're motivated by that. And so I wanted to meet those people. The way that we started doing that is through free laundry days. So we started doing these events at a laundromat in downtown Charleston. It was like a Wednesday evening. It was $75, and you just came and you did laundry for whoever needed their laundry done. And so I started just putting out there, like, let's all go meet up and do free laundry. And so we started doing that. And that's where I've met some of the people who I think are most integral of the success of this over the years, have been just the people who've come to those events, who've participated, who've brought their kids and their grandkids and brought food and, made it more of a group project.
How participatory are your kids and your husband in this? Are they part of this project, or did they just say, "Go ahead, Katie, do your thing"?
My husband's really good at lifting heavy stuff. And when I built the first 4 boxes, I was constantly like, and go to Lowe's, get a 4x4 post, get me some concrete. He was wonderful, especially in the beginning in establishing that. My kids were really little when this started, and that was another motivator for me. I think all parents were trying to just raise good humans, and it's not always easy, and there's not a lot of opportunities to give back when you're 3 years old or 6 years old. There's not a lot of programs or volunteer opportunities. People just don't organize them for kids that are that little. But kids can go to the grocery store and they can throw stuff in the cart. My kids like to do like rainbows. Like we would shop and buy like one thing that's red and one thing that's orange, and we would make a rainbow in the box, stuff like that. Or we would buy all green stuff for St. Patrick's Day or all red stuff for Valentine's Day. And so we used to do that a lot when they were little, and they thought that was really fun. Now, these days, one tradition that we have is at Thanksgiving. One of my kids always is in a soccer tournament that weekend. And so her team, we all go together between the games and we all go buy Thanksgiving supplies and then make a bunch of bags that have everything you need for Thanksgiving. And then everybody drives around town and puts the bags in the boxes while we wait for their next soccer game. So they are involved involuntarily, I would say, at the start, but voluntarily now.
And just to clarify, it's all non-perishable items, right?
Yes, it's all non-perishable. We do have some refrigerators in the network of pantries. So that was a
Really?
big step. I honestly have no idea what year that started. It was before COVID. Someone was selling sort of like a beverage refrigerator. If you could picture that, like at a gas station where the whole front is glass and you can slide the door. Somebody was closing a restaurant and selling one of those and gave it me a great deal on that. And so I bought that and we put it at a community center in West Ashley. And that was the first refrigerator. And so now we have, I can't remember, I think 5 refrigerators. A couple are at libraries and they have produce. I think that's a huge step because the non-perishables are not unhealthy. But when you can temperature control the food, you can add produce and eggs and milk and just so many things that just I think are a great addition to the idea and to the folks who are receiving those foods.
So is this still all on a voluntary basis, or did you set up an actual nonprofit or some sort of business entity?
So, in order to do the construction day back in the beginning, we had to be a nonprofit organization because we needed to get an insurance policy. It is a nonprofit, and that's why. Since then, the nonprofit has not really solicited any donations. We have some great donors that give every year, some people that have a recurring donation. There's one woman who gives $5 a month on PayPal every month, and she has for years. I've never met her. I think that's amazing. But there's not really an overhead. It's just me on my iPhone most of the time. We have a website and a board because it's a nonprofit, but there's not really any upkeep. So there's not a need for us to fundraise. Most of the money that we spend at this point is on laundry days because that's really the events that we do.
What about challenges or barriers to entry? I mean, we've talked a lot about the upside of this. What have been some of the roadblocks?
So in the beginning, I really shied away from putting a box at anywhere that wasn't just a private residence. I work in government and I know the restrictions that can be placed on, government properties, schools, and I just shied away from that in general. And it was really different schools that came to me and said, we want to put boxes at our public school or our private school. Again, I didn't say no to anybody because I might have had this idea and I might be spreading the idea around, but I don't own the box. If you've built it and you've put it at your neighbor's house, you made the box and your neighbor owns the dirt where you've put it. So I don't have any ownership over that. So I again didn't feel like I could or should police it in any way because I just wanted it to be grassroots and I wanted it to be how that particular community envisioned themselves helping their neighbors. Some of the challenges have been some of the feedback. People will message me and say, I saw someone taking food and she was wearing really nice shoes and she drove a Lexus and I just don't think that she needed it. Like that consistently in the beginning. I would get that message all the time. And then I just would say, well, she must have needed it. Maybe she took it to her neighbor. Like if you don't believe in this type of giving, there are many other causes that you can donate to. And anonymous giving isn't for everybody, and that's okay. I tried to be as diplomatic about that as possible because I do understand that people are not used to it. It's not the normal form of what we would think of as charity because it's not charity. It's more mutual aid than charity.
And community collaboration, it
Yeah.
sounds like, right? So I've heard you talk about, as I just said, collaboration. I've heard you talk, you said a couple of times about not saying no, about being very diplomatic, about letting things organically grow as
Mhm.
they will in a way that makes sense for each community. What about any other secrets for your success?
No, I think that I just am very persistent. I don't think that there's anything else to it other than that. In the beginning, just would try to every day sort of check in and see if I had anything I needed to respond to or repost or share or, an idea. I get all my good ideas when I'm in the shower because there's no one talking to me. So, whatever pops into my head that day, I'm like, maybe we should do a food drive, whatever it was. Or, a lot of other groups would reach out and say, "Hey, we're doing a coat giveaway. Do you want to be part of that?" Or, whatever the thing was. And so I don't feel like I ever really like had a stalemate. I felt like every day because it was a tiny baby step every day, it just added up over time. And then the more people that were paying attention, the more ideas that people had and things I had never thought of. Like there was a group of women who would put canned goods in book bags and they would run and that they call it rucking, and it's a fitness program and they would do that and fill the box that's, a half a mile away and then jog and fill the I was like, I would have never ever thought of that. But I thought it was a great idea. So I shared that they did it and then some other people did it. And it's really just grown like that.
I've talked on previous podcasts, and some of my guests have also talked about this idea of saying yes to the next right thing. I think that sharing of ideas and being open to new ideas really allows for the opportunity for growth. Speaking of growth, Katie, what's next for you? What do you want to achieve in the next few years?
I have no idea. I've never really had a grand plan for this organizationally or otherwise. I really just felt like if we operate from the premise of everybody can be kinder to each other, how do we teach our kids that? How do we exemplify that? Not just in this way, but in other ways as well. That's the end game and that's the goal. So I don't feel like there are milestones that need to be reached. In the beginning, I would keep track and I would be like, oh, we're going to celebrate the 50th location and the 200th location. I don't honestly know day to day how many there are. So that's not something I'm doing anymore, which is kind of nice because it's less taxing for me because sometimes people take them down. They were renting and they moved or whatever reason, the locations change, but I don't think that there's necessarily like a this is success, now we're done kind of thing. I don't think that exists.
Maybe it's just continuing to say yes to that next right thing with whatever
I
makes
hope so.
sense, right?
I
Yeah.
hope so because that's the only plan I have.
So aside from this project that we spent a lot of time talking about, anything that's on your bucket list?
Well, about 30 minutes ago, I added fly fishing in Bozeman, Montana to my bucket list with my kids. So there's that
Fantastic. Come on up.
in the summer.
Yes, in the summer.
In the summer, absolutely. My children and I and my husband were on a mission to go to all the states, so that fits in really well to that bucket list of ours. No, I'm sure that whatever the next thing is will come to me. I think that, my day to day on this project is minimal at this point. So I do think that I'm ready for whatever the next thing is, whether that's professionally or in some sort of nonprofit giving back, organized or otherwise. I largely think that I have launched this idea and this project and this mindset to the community here. So I don't know what's next, but I look forward to it, whatever it is.
So I always like to ask about words of wisdom, especially when we look at successes like you've had with this blessing box. If there's one thing that you wish that you had known when you started, what would it be?
I tried really hard in the beginning for this to not have a face at all because I wanted it to be truly anonymous. And I stayed as much as I could anonymous myself until I realized someone has to, be the person that it gets interviewed for the newspaper or whatever. media outlet because otherwise you miss those opportunities. I didn't really jump into putting my face on this, and then I had some guilt, I think, when I finally did, because I didn't want people to think that this is something that I was doing for recognition. That was something that was hard for me to sort of juggle because I didn't want to be recognized for it, but then somebody had to be the one talking, and I struggled with that, and I think I beat myself up about that. If I could tell myself back then something, it would be that it's gonna be okay. It's gonna work out. Because that was hard for me, because I do think that some people have not good motivations for starting and trying to do things, sort of this nature, and I didn't wanna be among them.
How did you reconcile that?
So I was nominated for an award called the Spotlight Awards, and they were named for each of the victims of the Mother Emanuel shooting. It was something that I really didn't feel like I was worthy of, and I was uncomfortable with the idea that people who had lost so much and been so gracious in that process and been just such amazing people, I didn't feel like I should be in the same room as them. That was really hard for me, and various people involved in that project were like, "No, this is what we want. We want their spirit to be remembered. We want people who are out here doing good things to get their recognition while they're here, while they're doing it." But that really was the beginning for me to be able to say, "It's okay to have this balance." That was deep and that was hard.
But once you did, then you said that you could start to do media and other things like that, and that helped grow this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and I don't think that it would have taken off in the way that it did
Mhm.
if I hadn't been able to stand in that position and ask people, to come forward and to help. So I don't think that it would be as widespread now as it is now without that. So I'm glad that it worked out.
It sounds like you were very brave to step out of your comfort zone and to put a face with the project. So, what advice would you give to someone who wants to be brave, who wants to chase that calling or that purpose or that big dream? What would you say to them?
The hardest thing is to say it out loud to somebody else. That's the hardest thing. I remember kind of working this idea over in my brain for a long time before I even had the courage to tell anyone because it seemed like, kind of a weird idea. I remember that I, had lunch with a friend of mine who's a lawyer also, and I had had another idea before this. And I had kind of touched on that with him, and he was like, "No, you stay in your lane. That is not it. Like, don't do that." And I was like, "Oh, so you don't like that idea? Let me tell you about these blessing boxes." And he was like, "Now that's a good idea." So he was the first sounding board for me. And I felt like an idiot telling him because I literally was like, "Well, I don't want one, I want 10. And I don't know where I'm going to put them. And I don't know how I'm going to make them." So it sounded dumb, even to me. But I think that once you take that first step, once you say it out loud, then the next step comes naturally. Because what comes next? That's what the person you're going to say. Well, what do you do first? And then you have to figure out that answer. But you're not going to ever get to that second step until you say it out loud. So for me, that was hard. But once I did it, he was like, "Oh, okay. So what's next?" And then I kind of I knew, but I didn't process that I knew until he started asking me questions about it.
How long did you think about it before you had the courage to actually verbalize
Oh,
your
like
idea?
lots of showers. I would think about it in the shower. I would think about it, and when I was exercising, yeah, all the time, weeks, definitely weeks. And then one of the things that got me, I think, over that hurdle is I had this moment of thinking, what if someone else thinks of this, starts doing it, doesn't do it as well as I would have done it, and then I have to be like, should have been done this way. And then that's what made me jump into the fire, I think, is that I was afraid that someone was going to read my mind, have this idea, and do it wrong. And then I was like, well, I'm going to have to do it first.
Did you feel it deep in your gut where you felt like this was a calling or a deep passion or something that you had to do?
More than anything, I just every day at that time was looking around, reading the news, hearing conversations and thinking, like, this is not who we are. This is not the world I want my kids to live in. Everyone's fighting. It's red state, it's blue state, everyone is fighting. And I hated that. And I was anxious to do something. And I think at that point I really felt like anything. I just needed to do something to make me feel like I was part of the solution and not part of that problem.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to add?
I always know the what comes next question is coming, and I always know that I don't have an answer for it because I really don't. And I think that's okay. So far, it's been okay. I'm 7 years in, and it's been okay so far.
Well, Katie, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to share your passions, your inspirations, and of course, your keys to success. You're making such a huge impact in a lot of lives throughout the Low Country. And it's wonderful to hear how you had this idea, this inkling of an idea, and how it's grown into such a tremendous gift for over 65,000 people. That's pretty incredible. So thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
And listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you want to know more about the Blessing Box Project or even how to replicate this in your own community, check out the show notes because I will put links to Katie's book and her website in the show notes. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode of Two Gals and a Mic and another extraordinary woman who is making an impact. I'll see you then.